have danced in Paris, Madrid, Monte Carlo, Berlin, and Vienna. I have performed for barons, ambassadors, and princes. From the moment I introduced my Javanese dances, my fate was sealed. With every veil I threw off, my success rose. Pretending to consider my dances very artistic, thus praising my art, they came to see nudity. I chose an Indian name. I became Matahari, Eye of the Day. I received the protection of the richest men, and I did not lack the skill to profit from that. Realize that I have lived all my adult life as Matahari, that I think and act as her. I am a woman of the world, but I'm not a traitor. I beg you to believe me. I never committed a single act of espionage against France. Never. I was born Margaretha Zelle, August 7th, 1876. We lived in Leeuwarden, a small country town in Friesland, which is in the northern part of the Netherlands. My father's grandest moment was being selected to be in the Mounted Guard of Honor when King Willem III visited Leeuwarden.
Margaretha's father was a boastful man. He liked to show off that he did well, and sometimes people called him mockingly the Baron.
He was not a baron. He was just a hat maker. He owned a store in the central street of Leeuwarden, and he wanted to have more. His daughter, Margaret, was the apple of his eye. He just loved this girl. Margaret heard her father invent things about his family, his ancestors, his real life. So she learned that a pleasant lie is more rewarding than plain truth. Margaret was a spoiled child. Her father gave her lavish gifts, including a small carriage drawn by goats. She was the most pretty girl in Leeuwarden. She went to the best private school that her father could find. She learned what she would use all her life. Languages, she learned German, French, and English. She would learn to ride. She just loved horses. This is an enchanted childhood up to her 13th birthday, when suddenly things became from bad to worse.
When Matahari was 13, her father came upon hard times.
He went bankrupt. That was very shameful.
And subsequently, the father left the family.
She had to quit school. School was very expensive.
A year later, Margaretha's mother died of tuberculosis.
On the day of her mother's death, she would play piano all day long. And that was shocking for the neighbors, because when you're in mourning, you don't play music. She went to live with her godfather, Mr. Visser. He did not know what to do with this teenager, so he decided to send her to school to become a school teacher for small children.
When Margaretha was studying to be a teacher, she had this affair.
There were allegations that she was found on the lap of director Haanstra, so that something was going on.
The headmaster fell madly in love with this young girl. The scandal was huge.
This affair didn't affect Mr. Haanstra. There were no consequences for him. She was tainted by this affair. She had to leave. She went to live with her uncle and aunt in The Hague.
So she spent her days reading the classified advertisement in the local newspaper. Suddenly, she came on something very interesting.
Officer on home leave from Dutch East Indies would like to meet a girl of pleasant character. Object, matrimony.
So she answered this ad. She had the wonderful idea to send a photo of her. And on this photograph, she's absolutely breathtaking. So he answered Margaretha. They decided to meet in Amsterdam in front of the Rijksmuseum.
6 days later, they were engaged.
Rudolf Machiel was 39 at the time. He was an officer. He was not in very good health. He has diabetes, and he was alcoholic, and he was very bad-tempered. The only good thing we can say about him, he still had some allure when he was in uniform.
So this was a great chance for her to become a decent, married woman.
We have incredible letters from Margaretha to Rudolf Machiel. So audacious for the time, giving intimate details on their sexual life.
You ask me if I'm longing to do crazy things. Rather 10 times than only one. I do not believe either that all these pleasures can ever end.
She loved to make love, and he enjoyed her very much.
Rudolf and I were married July 11th, 1895, in a civil ceremony at the City Hall in Amsterdam. I was 19, he was 39.
Their life changed drastically. They had no money because Rudolf's pension was not very high.
I had not married to go without luxury, and I was flirtatious, and he did not like that. I had inclinations that made it impossible for a woman like me to be a good housewife. I was not content at home. I confess frankly, I wanted to live like a colorful butterfly in the sun. On January 30th, 1897, our son Norman was born. 3 months later, we boarded the Princess Amalia, bound for the Dutch East Indies. I was so glad to leave Amsterdam for a new life.
When they finally got to Java, it was a total disappointment for Margaretha. Their first assignment was in the center of Java, and there was nothing there except insect and heat. She had her baby, of course, And very quickly she was pregnant again.
On May 2nd, 1898, our daughter Jeanne-Louise was born. We always called our daughter Non, which is Malaysian for young girl. Non was a beautiful child, with my dark hair and dark eyes.
Margarethe was really happy. She had her 2 babies, of course, but she was discharged of all duties of a mother. For the first time, she felt free and she became very interesting in the culture of Java. She used to wear a sari and she was learning how to dance. She learned even a few words of Malaysian, and nearly every night there was a ball or a party and she was dancing with officers.
Rudolph wanted her to be beautiful and quiet and servile. She was beautiful, but she was definitely not quiet and not servile. And she did not enact the wifely role.
When it became obvious that he couldn't conquer her or own her, he grew increasingly physically and emotionally violent.
Rudolph is intolerable. Meanwhile, the young lieutenants pursue me and are in love with me. It's difficult for me to behave in a way which will give my husband no cause for reproach.
Suddenly, this terrible thing happened, this tragedy.
Norman and Non became violently ill, vomiting a terrible black liquid. Over the course of a week, their condition worsened. Rudolph stayed by Norman's bedside. Slowly, little Norman's life ebbed away. Non miraculously survived.
Rudolph was heartbroken. You can only be moved by his grief. And of course, Margarethe was devastated too.
My lovely little Norman has died, and I'm not in a state to write much about it. The passing of my dear Norman has taken everything out of me.
Norman died, and it's not clear what is the cause of this death. There were rumors that Rudolph, who was not very faithful, gave syphilis to Margaretha and the children, so they had to be treated. And that cure was very aggressive. That could also be a cause for the death of this little boy, Norman.
It's a bundle of letters written in the years 1902, 1903, 1904. And in these letters, this is the real Margaretha Zelle. It gave so much insight in the person she was before she was famous.
In one of Margaretha's letters, she discloses that she had syphilis and that the whole family was treated for that. She wants that to remain a secret because that, of course, was very shameful. She cares especially about her daughter, Non, because if people would know that she had syphilis and was treated for that, she would become unmarriable.
Dearest Cousin Edward, I would like to tell you something that I do not wish to be for Cousin Anna's ears. When you have a moment alone with Rudolph, just ask him the reason why his child spent 3 months at the hospital and had to undergo a topical treatment of mercury and blue ointment.
She explains that she had been treated with mercury. Both children had been forced to undergo this treatment. And here is an indication that Norman was killed by the mercury treatment. It was a very secret thing to deal with.
Life became unbearable in this family. It was not a family anymore. It was just a grieving couple. They could not help each other. They destroyed each other.
I am alone here, in a foreign country, without family and without anything, and I can't fight against such a brutal man. He hits me, spits on me, and says the worst things to me in his rage. I don't want to be treated like this anymore, but I have no money.
Margaretha wanted to go back. She endlessly asked and begged to go back to the Netherlands, and finally he gave in.
At last, we are going back to the Netherlands. But Rudolf owes so much money. Upon our return, Rudolf's creditors hounded him. He continued to drink, beat me, and refused to give me any money. Non fell ill. Rudolf was terrified this might be a repeat of Norman's illness. The next day, Rudolf took Non to the post office and never returned. I filed for divorce. I asked for custody of Non and a monthly allowance of 100 guilders. 3 days later, the court granted all of my requests and I had a legal separation. But Rudolf would not agree to the terms.
Margaretha Zelle was at a pivotal point. She very much wanted her daughter with her, but she still needed Rudolf to provide for them, and Rudolf refused to do so.
If Non were living with me, I would be unable to work. Every moment of feeling her absence makes me hate that man the more. I have been trying all manner of avenues, but I've been unable to find a decent job. I am tired of struggling against life, and I want one of two things. Either to have Nonnie with me and be a proper mother, or to go to Paris and leave respectability behind. I am well aware that such a life ends with mishap.
It's a cry from the heart here, and after such a long time struggling and looking for a proper life, she's coming to an end with it.
Whatever I do, I am besmirched. I still don't have Non, and I no longer care about the rest. I am poverty-stricken. Auntie said to me, "There's no way out other than going back to your husband. You're his wife, after all. He has to support you." I said, "Auntie, I'm terrified of him. I'd sooner throw myself under a tram." I had an acquaintance, a high-ranking gentleman and his wife from the East Indies, who said, "You mustn't return to your husband, as I am sure he'll mutilate you, and we cannot have that on our conscience." And that gentleman gave me money for Paris.
And that's where the story of Mata Hari begins.
In 1904, when Mata Hari came to Paris, Paris was at its zenith of glamour and beauty. It was the city of light, a place where everyone wanted to be.
It was a time of change, it was a time of ferment on just about every front that you could think of. You had Matisse, Picasso, you had Ravel and Debussy composing music that just put the traditionalists on edge. In fashion, Paul Poiret, Fortuny, draping women rather than stifling them in clothes.
This was a great time for fashion. The women were very glamorous, but it was still becoming more free.
There was a huge sense of upheaval going on as Mata Hari was arriving in town.
She was courageous and stubborn. And she decided to go to Paris, but in her terms. If you look rich and well off, well, everyone will believe it. She decided to settle in the Grand Hotel, one of the most famous palaces at the time. And she did a spectacular entrance with a majestic walk and all the men in the Grand Hotel looked at her and said, "Who is this creature?" She was settled as a femme entretenue, which is not exactly a prostitute.
Women like Mata Hari were independent, forging their own careers, but they were also in search of rich guys who would foot some bills and help them along. And certainly Mata Hari found one after another of those men.
She had the basis, the Grand Hotel, and she had some money.
Ernst Mollier hired Mata Hari to be a part of the circus.
Her first job was in the Cirque Mollier as a professional horsewoman.
She performed in the Cirque Mollier, this aristocratic private circus, and there she was able to meet other people of the highest social level in Paris.
Finally, she decided to become an exotic dancer.
Matahari discovered the dance in Indonesia, in Java, and she tried to recreate a kind of Indian dance mixed with European elements.
The salons were an essential and very important part of Paris's cultural life. There would be music, there would be singing, there would be sometimes dancing. And this is how Mata Hari found her entree into society.
At the salon of Madame Kirievsky, I caught the eye of Émile Guimet, who had recently opened his Museum of Oriental Art, the Musée Guimet.
Émile Guimet knew perfectly Matahari wasn't a true dancer. The things he wants with her is to create the buzz.
Émile Guimet invited 600 of Paris's elite society to attend my premiere performance at the Musée Guimet. It was a coveted invitation, as everyone was eager to see for themselves if the rumors about me were true.
Émile Guimet selected the audience. We had writers, artists, and some people very important for the night life in Paris that can speak about the events.
March 13, 1905. That was the most important evening of her life.
Matahari appears as a shadow, so it was a kind of apparition. It was quite a scandal to have these very mixed things, Shiva, Guimet, Asia, a beautiful woman. It was a kind of atmosphere, very non-conventional for the time. She made 3 dances, and she removed in each dance a part of her costume.
Mata Hari's costume was very exotic. She had an exotic headdress, lots of jewelry, a metal bra, lots of veils and scarves.
In the shadow of the library, the audience thought that she finished nude, but it's not true. She had a very transparent veil. We know that because we have the pictures, but all the people thought that she was nude. All the newspapers make the headlines on the nudity of Matahari. It was a scandal.
And one night, Paris was at her feet, at her bare feet.
presenting herself as an art form, Mata Hari raised herself above the level of the entertainer, the striptease, the circus, and it became something very, very classy.
Historically, Paris has always been a place that has loved entertainment, women, glamour. She became headline news overnight. Everyone knew her name by morning.
And Émile Guimet was very happy because everybody spoke about the Musée Guimet. And for Mata Hari, it was also very successful because everybody wanted to receive Mata Hari, the dancer.
Beginning with her performance at the Guimet Museum in Paris, which won her enormous publicity and favor with aristocratic circles, she was able to do a dance that was a kind of striptease and a kind of erotic, sexually charged dance. She was able to do this without having any of the overtones of vulgarity because she was able to present it as a religious rite.
Her dancing became very much almost like educational. And so she could take off all her clothes and the gentleman could enjoy that, while the women could just say, oh, well, she's teaching us something about the Far East that's very, very important.
My Dance is a sacred poem in which each movement is a word and whose every move is underlined by music. The temple in which I dance can be vague or faithfully reproduced, for I am the temple. One must always translate the three stages which correspond to the divine attributes of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Creation through incarnation.
Mata Hari had to have had a dynamic stage presence in order to achieve the kind of success she did. There's definitely something to be said for the presence that you command and the authenticity of what you're doing, believing in what you're doing, even if it's made up.
Continuing to perform in salons and in elite gatherings, not just on the stage, continued to give her a certain cachet.
The impresario Gabriel Astruc, the top agent in Europe, became my manager. He booked me into the Olympia Theatre.
It was at the Olympia on the Boulevard des Capucines, and it drew the best performers and the well-to-do.
This was the beginning of my greatest success. For the first time, large audiences could come to see me, and they were eager to do so. I performed Le Rêve and earned the astounding sum of 10,000 francs. My reviews were glowing, full of lavish praise.
Mata Hari was a sensation in Paris, but very quickly her fame spread around.
I became a sought-after star. I traveled to Madrid, where I entranced my audiences. I danced 2 weeks with full houses every night. In Monte Carlo, I was given the lead role in Massenet's much-loved opera, Le Roi de Lahore. This earned me the artistic respect I coveted.
She went to dance in Monaco, and Massenet was crazy about Mata Hari. He called her Mata. He wrote a letter to her when she was living in Berlin, and on the envelope the address was only Mata Hari, Berlin. She received the letter.
I performed in Berlin and Vienna. With my fluent German, I captured the imagination and adulation of my audiences. In 1905, I gave over 30 performances in Paris theatres and salons. I was the highest paid dancer in Europe. Musica declared me a star of dance. I thank God I took that train to Paris.
Mata Hari capitalized on the exoticism and who her onstage persona was.
One time she was a temple dancer's child. Another time she descended from Indian royalty. You name it, she thought of it and she told it.
Have to say she was a master at getting publicity.
What Mata Hari really understood was the importance of creating a persona around herself using the media. She created her own fantasy world and convinced her audience that this world was real.
And it's just so telling that we're discussing Mata Hari and we're not discussing Margaretha Zelle. Mata Hari, that's who we want to talk about. And Mata Hari is built on those stories that she told.
Mata Hari was a real socialite. She had private performances at her house in Neuilly, for which she invited the rich and the famous. She was photographed at the racetrack, and also she made appearances in fashion magazines. So she did everything to stay at the center of attention.
She was always fantasizing about getting her daughter back, but she became a self-created, self-made woman in Paris with a new life.
She had a sophisticated, intelligent air about her that impressed the people she met.
The predominant characteristic of Mata Hari was that here was a woman with great charisma.
There was a charm there in her being, in her manner, that invited men to take her in as their companion, mistress, courtesan.
For example, Gaston Meunier, who was the king of chocolate in France.
Meunier praised the lines of my beautiful body and called me an oriental dream.
Mata Hari was one of those women that was taken care of. Historically, showgirls were famously kept, and they weren't really even hiding it. You had patrons that took care of you, paid for your clothes, paid for where you lived. Paris is one of those cities that has always and will always accept women like Mata Hari.
How did Mata Hari enter into the life of a courtesan? I think she entered on it very enthusiastically, as I understand. She enjoyed having lovers. She enjoyed the excitement.
For Mata Hari, money was simply freedom. It allowed her unparalleled access to experiences of all kinds.
She loved luxury. She loves beautiful gowns. She loved beautiful jewels, furs, horses. So she was broke all the time, but that was not a problem.
Mata Hari used money as a resource. It was something that symbolized freedom and happiness, and being close to a man in uniform was something different than money. It was being close to power.
My lovers were some of the most powerful and aristocratic men, yet I did not fall in love with any of them. When I was first in Madrid, I met Jules Cambon, then the French ambassador to Spain. Another of my longtime lovers was Henri de Rothschild. Alfred Messimy, who was Minister of War, was another of my lovers.
Having a relationship with an older man allowed Mata Hari to play the young, cherished, free feminine that she sought from her early childhood. And repeating that scenario over and over and over again is very telling about where her psychic development lied. When Mata Hari was on stage, she really came alive. And she had once said about herself that no one would come to see me if I didn't take off all of my clothes. And I think that she was really missing that what they came to see was that she performed so fully with every bit of her body. I see that as her most authentic. See me completely bare, offer myself to something higher.
I still had hopes of being able to have none with me, but in 1906, Rudolf wished to remarry and filed for divorce on the grounds of immoral behavior, indecency, and adultery. His lawyer threatened to show photos of my nude dancing in court. I was forced to concede, and Rudolf was awarded custody of none. I did not know when I would be able to see my daughter again.
She was able to quit her career to follow a man, the first time with the German Lieutenant Albert Kiefer. He was married to a beautiful Hungarian lady, very rich. In fact, the money was from his wife, which can obviously create a problem.
I remained with my lover Kiepert for 3 years. He set me up in Berlin and kept me sumptuously.
They even went on a cruise to Egypt.
And during this time, I rarely performed.
Finally, family said, stop. If not, you will get divorced.
Kiepert separated from me and gave me 300,000 marks.
The second time she followed someone was a French banker named Xavier Rousseau. Xavier Rousseau was married too. Suddenly, she leaves Paris and she went to the country to live nearly 2 years.
My lover Rousseau visited on the weekends, but I was quite alone during the week.
She would ride a lot. She had 4 beautiful horses. Mata Hari was the most clean woman you can imagine. She had an obsession of hygiene. She would take long baths. There was no running water in the chateau, so you can imagine the servant with the hot water bucket twice a day.
In 1912, Rousseau's bad investments drained my private fortune, over 200,000 marks. I separated from him, sold everything, and resumed my life in theatre. I went to Milan, and I had a highly successful 2-month engagement. I danced The Princess and the Magic Flower at the prestigious La Scala Theatre. My fame restored. I danced the part of Venus in Marenko's ballet. Of course, this part suited me perfectly. The conductor, Tullio Serafin, affectionately called me una creatura adorabile, an adorable creature. My performance was a triumph, and I had another charming devotee. Back in France, I kept in the spotlight with garden parties. I invited Inayat Khan, the renowned Indian musician, to perform with me. The association with Inayat Khan enhanced my reputation. The role I truly desired was that of Salome.
Salome was the reason that John the Baptist was decapitated. She was a very sensual and beautiful woman, just like Mata Hari. She is appealing, but she is also dangerous.
The Salome dance was going on across Europe in the early 1900s. It was not Mata Hari's invention.
The Salome dance was very erotic, very risque, but the Salome craze was possible because this was a biblical text, and so they could get away with it. Mata Hari really wanted to dance the part of Oscar Wilde's Salome, but this part was being performed by her rival Maud Allan.
I knew I could dance a more alluring and authentic Salome than Maud Allan, who had borrowed shamelessly from my costume and style of dance.
Mata Hari longed to dance this part. She managed to perform it privately for Prince di San Faustino at a palace in Rome. Mata Hari got very naked during this performance, and the prince was so pleased he commissioned a painting of Mata Hari as a topless, laughing Salome.
In 1912, Rudolf divorced his second wife, and I petitioned the Dutch government for custody of Non. My request was denied. Rudolf refused to allow me to see or even write to Non. I am grief-stricken that my daughter is growing up without me.
Mata Hari was now over 30. She had difficulties to find engagement to dance.
I was turned down by Diaghilev and the Ballet Russe because he found my figure too matronly. To make matters worse, Eastern dancers had sprung out of the ground. The music halls were crowded with imitators.
She was facing competitors, imitators, who picked up the idea and tried to pass themselves off as the equivalent.
Not only did I have imitators to contend with, but other artists, such as Louis Fuller and Isadora Duncan, who continued to be popular with Parisian audiences.
The difference between Mata Hari and Isadora Duncan was the founder of modern dance. Dance was everything to her. She had a theory of dance, and her idea was to spread it to the world. Mata Hari used her art form to advance herself.
Mata Hari did perform at the Folies Bergère. It was a step down from her aristocratic circle beginning.
In 1913, I played to sold-out audiences at the Folies Bergère. I danced a Spanish piece based on a Goya painting. I became desperate enough to perform in a low-class theatre in Sicily that included a trained dog act. I have to confess, my star was growing dimmer.
Mata Hari had been a star. She was riding the wave from 1905 to 1914. Whatever she did was a success. And all of a sudden, in 1914, all that stopped.
It's not a good year for her. She has to leave Paris because she spends so much money. She never paid one bill.
I was thrilled to land a 6-month engagement in Berlin at the Metropoltheater. Just what I needed to reignite my career.
We have that curious testimony of Mata Hari, a letter she sent to Inayat Khan 2 days before the war broke out, where she tries to get him to come to Berlin. And one is left wondering that even at that period, she was not really aware that war was on the point of breaking out. She lived in a world of her own. She did not really relate to the outside world and the real dangers in that outside world.
World War I breaks out and foreigners have to leave Berlin, including Mata Hari.
It all stops because of the war. And then she writes down in her scrapbook, La guerre, théâtre fermé, the theater has been closed, it's war. She writes it down, but doesn't realize that all things have changed now. I think that's her fate, not having this insight in what's really happening now, and that her role has been faded out.
After the start of the war, she found herself in Berlin with all her bank accounts and assets frozen, so she had no money to go back to Holland. She seduced a Dutch businessman who paid for a train ticket back to The Hague.
But she has to find money because nobody was waiting for her.
She takes on a new lover, Baron van der Capellen, who supports her.
When she was in The Hague, someone knocked at the door one evening, and that someone was the Council of Germany, Herr Kramer. And Herr Kramer thought she might be a good agent for him.
Kramer asked her to spy for Germany and offered her money to do so. Nowadays, the equivalent of around $60,000.
The reason why Mata Hari was so desirable as a spy is because she already had a network that was very interesting for secret services. As a courtesan, she had contacts in government circles, and because of her love for men in uniform, she had many friends amongst high-ranking military officers.
Mata Hari accepted, and Kramer supplied her with invisible ink, instructed her to sign her letters with the code name H21.
H21, that was a code name, was a very amateur spy. She didn't do it because she felt loyal to Germany. She didn't do it because she hated France. She did it because she needed the money, and she also did it because she was hoping that would be an opportunity to take money from the Germans. So she thought, if that German guy is willing to give me money, why not? That's only a way of getting reimbursed from what the Germans stole from me. To her, becoming age 21 and working for the Germans in some faraway future, she was a bit like Scarlet in Gone with the Wind. We'll see about that tomorrow. And tomorrow seemed always to be an eternity ahead. She had no reason to consider herself as a spy. As a matter of fact, we think that she threw the small bottle of invisible ink into the channel as soon as she could.
Although The Hague proved to be a safe haven from the war, it was too quiet, and Rudolf did not permit me to see none. I decided to return to Paris.
Mata Hari returning to Paris at the height of the Battle of Verdun, yes, it was distinctly an unusual decision to make, but it wasn't a smart thing to do.
The Paris she was going to was not the same Paris. Everybody had been changed by the war.
World War I made Paris a sadder, more silent place. No people on the streets, no cafes.
No place for pleasure, entertainment. So many families had lost sons and fathers and brothers. France was in mourning. As a foreign woman, Mata Hari was viewed with great suspicion.
She doesn't seem to realize that the whole world is ablaze. She was not an international dancer anymore. She was a spy. To the very end, she never realized her life was in danger.
When I arrived back in Paris, I stayed as usual at the Grand Hotel. I soon noticed that I was constantly being followed by two men. They watched my every move.
She's under scrutiny from the very morning to the end of the evening. And we have, in the official file of the case, all the details about what Mata Hari does. She meets friends, she goes to shops, except, of course, it's wartime and nothing is like before, which doesn't prevent her from spending the money she doesn't have. If you have a look at the dossier, all the bills of hat makers, stores, and so on and so forth are there, and you see she spends literally fortunes. Apparently the money she had was the money from her old flame. He was still paying for her life and her buying sprees.
I met and fell in love with Captain Vladimir de Maslov, a handsome 21-year-old Russian officer. He is the only man I have truly loved.
She's madly in love with him, and that's going to change her life, and unfortunately, it's not going to change it for the best.
Vladimir was stationed near Vittel, and I was desperate to go and see him again. Vittel was so close to the front that I needed a special stamp to travel there. I was advised to see Captain Georges Ladoux, the head of French intelligence. Captain Ladoux received me respectfully. He remarked that if I loved all of France, I could render France a great service. I said I had not thought of it. He asked me to reflect upon it. He stamped my paper for Vittel and asked me to let him know my decision upon my return. Some of the most beautiful days of my life were spent in Vittel with my dear Vadim.
They will stay at the Park Hotel, which is the best hotel there. And there they're going to spend a few days and nights, not even going out. Of course, the police officers were following her as usual. And they scrupulously write down a timetable. She's in bed all day with Maslov. And this is the apex of her life. There's no reason to doubt that she was really deeply in love.
I learned that Vadim had been gravely injured by asphyxiating gas and was in danger of going blind. I began to reflect. I must ask Captain Ladoux for enough money that I never have to deceive Vadim with other men. I will do what the captain asks. Captain Ladoux will pay me, I will marry my lover, and I will be the happiest woman on earth.
Mata Hari's attraction to espionage was probably like a game. Her life was already so fictional that this was just one more chapter in her fictional book.
Saying that Maslov is not as much in love with Mata Hari as she is with him does not imply that he doesn't have any feelings for her.
With Vladimir, it was the power flip where she wasn't so concerned with what he could do for her, but with giving of herself.
Upon my return from Vittel, I went to see Ladoux. I told him that I would accept his offer to spy for France. I asked for 1 million francs. He was taken aback by the sum, but agreed to pay if I truly rendered the service he requested.
It was agreed that she would travel to the Netherlands to get more information and more instructions. It's questionable whether Ladoux really wanted Mata Hari to become a real spy.
I would tend to believe that he's like a big cat playing with a small mouse.
On Captain Ladoux's orders, I began my journey. I boarded a boat from Spain, bound for the Netherlands, and from there I could travel to Belgium. When our boat docked at the English port of Falmouth, I was rudely awakened.
The British counterintelligence officer mistakes her for a well-known female spy called Clara Benedict. But when the British tell her, "You are the famous Clara Benedict spy, aren't you?" she bursts out laughing and she says, "No, I'm not. Have a look at the photo you're showing me. She's much fatter than I am."
The officer took from his pocket an amateur photograph of a woman dressed in Spanish style. My protestations did not convince him. My cabin was searched with unheard of thoroughness. They were unfastening the paintings from the walls and looking under my bed with an electric lamp. I was subjected to a personal search. The officer made me disembark and took me to London with my baggage.
After Matahari was arrested, taken off the boat and onto the train to London, she charmed her escorting agents so much that they allowed her to first go to an hotel and change her clothes before going to interrogation at Scotland Yard.
She is interrogated by #1 British counterintelligence network, Basil Thompson. Well, he knows that she's not Clara Benedict, and I don't think he ever believes she's a professional spy.
I was quite upset, as I was detained 4 days and interrogated intensely.
Being confronted with Basil Thompson, she says, "Incidentally, I'm on your side, you know, I'm working for you."
Finally, I said, "I have something to tell you that will surprise you. Captain Ledoux asked me to go into his service, and I promised to do something for him. He told me to go to Holland and await his instructions."
Which, of course, no real spy would ever say, even to allies. And she says, you can ask him, you know, if you send a cable to Paris, he will confirm that I'm actually a French agent undercover working for him. Thompson sends a cable to the Ministry of the War in Paris and gets a rather embarrassed and confused answer from Ledoux.
Ledoux said, no, I didn't hire her. But he asked them to let her go and send her to Spain. And that's what they did, so she was placed back on the ship to Spain. Ledoux set a trap for Matahari. He betrayed her, whereas she thought that they had an agreement.
And so she goes back to Spain. With that episode goes her dream of going to Belgium and spying for the French. Being a resourceful woman, she finds a plan B. And that is simply, since I'm in Spain, why not make the best of it?
She has contact with the German head of intelligence, Mr. von Kalle.
She says, Kalle was no difficult prey at all. I did what a woman would do under such circumstances to seduce him, and it worked. The more intimate he gets with her, the more he's doubting.
He betrays her. He writes telegrams in code that he knew the French had already deciphered, so the French could read those telegrams.
Kalle says to the Germans, I've been in touch with our agent, H21. And Matahari was obviously the person Kalle was talking about. When he gives her 3 secrets, he makes sure that those secrets are not fresh secrets. And of course, she decides to go back to France and speak with Ledoux face to face.
I returned to Paris with information for Ledoux. I went to his office several times and sent him messages, but he refused to see me.
She's, one might say, unbalanced by what's happening. She doesn't understand. She catches a coach that takes her far away to the suburbs of Paris. And if you go through the secret files of the War Council, you know exactly what she did there, because the police went to that place after she'd left and had a word with the person who was living there, a lady who called herself a medium. The medium tells her, I see 2 things. You're not going to get your million. And the second thing I see is your end is very near. From then on, things go from bad to worse for her. In France, justice is represented as a beautiful woman, blindfolded. It means that she must be blind to what's happening around the case she's supposed to decide on. And in Matahari's case, one can say that justice was not blindfolded.
I was arrested by the French police. I was taken to Monsieur Bouchardon, who informed me that I was named as German Agent H21.
Once you are accused of being a spy, it was very difficult. Your fate was sealed.
I am accused of attempted espionage, of passing intelligence to the enemy, and of receiving payment from the Germans. I deny all allegations. I am innocent. French counter-espionage is playing with me. I have only acted on instructions.
In the year of her arrest, things are not going very well for the Allies.
People were dead tired of war. Nobody would have thought that the war would go on for more than 4 years. There were desertions everywhere, and people were waiting for blows to be exerted on what they perceived was the enemy.
The First World War was partly fought through war propaganda and intelligence. This also encouraged a sort of paranoia. Everybody could be a spy.
Conspiracy theories are developed to explain why they are not able to defeat the Germans. And one of these conspiracy theories is that Germans have lots of femmes fatale who are actually sent to Allied officers to seduce them, to squeeze information out of them.
Public opinion needed a scapegoat.
She fits the picture perfectly.
Bouchardon was probably Mata Hari's worst enemy. Mata Hari represents what he hates most in the world. She was pretty, she was promiscuous, and he had this puritanical nature that made her look like an incarnation of the devil.
Mata Hari was a threatening figure. Her boldness, her sexuality, the way that she lived her life was definitely in an untraditional way that a woman would live her life. Mata Hari was a very convenient propaganda piece.
Bouchardon knew exactly that they had the prey they needed. Can you imagine that woman who'd been the Queen of Paris? She was thrown into the worst prison in Paris at the time, the infamous Prison Saint-Lazare. Damp, rats, insects, fleas. Minimum comfort, if you can call a wooden bed and a wooden chair and a bucket for what you imagine comfort. And she would spend months there.
Mata Hari is pleading her cause in an endless series of letters to Bouchardon.
For 3 months, I am imprisoned in this cell. Morally and physically, you have done me such harm that I beg you to end it. I cannot support any longer the filth, the lack of care for my body, and the disgusting food.
Nearly every day she writes to him, "Please, Lieutenant, sell my jewels, what is left of my jewels. Get the money to enable me to buy a piece of soap. Please let me have a bath. I can't stand it." Every letter she wrote to Bouchardon to ask for money to be able to buy extra food or to buy soap was rejected.
I beg you to permit me to let Captain de Maslov know what has happened to me. He could think I have left Paris without saying anything to him. He does not deserve to suffer because of me.
My darling, I am completely astonished by your silence. I wait every day for your response. Each day I do not hear from you feels like an eternity. Upon receipt of this, please telegraph me.
Fortunately for Mata Hari, she had an old friend, Edouard Clunet, who was a star amongst barristers at the time. He very heartily tried to defend her, but Bouchardon, as well as his fellow Mornay, who was going to present the case to the court when she would be judged, Bouchardon and Mornay did absolutely everything they could to hinder his work. Edouard Clunet was never allowed to be present when she was interrogated.
During the investigation into Mata Hari, Bouchardon was suddenly given some telegrams by Ladoux. The authenticity of these telegrams is questionable. What is important is that these telegrams were key into convicting Mata Hari. Ladoux never told Bouchardon that the telegrams were written in the old code that the Germans knew the French could decipher. The telegrams were sent by the German military attaché in Madrid, Galle. They referred to Agent H21 and informed Berlin that she has arrived and pretended to spy for the French. Bouchardon, with telegrams in hand, now zeroed in for the attack.
And he shows her the cables. Now stop pretending you're innocent. I have here strong evidence against you. You are guilty. Incidentally, you were hoping that Maslov would come and testify for you, but your love Maslov is going away and he's going to be married to a Russian girl. And this, of course, is devastating. He sends her back to prison, where he leaves her for a few weeks, hoping she's going to break down. And this is what's going to happen.
I cannot stand this life. I would rather hang myself from the bars than to live like this. I fear I will never see my non again.
During her interrogation by Bouchardon, Mata-Hari made one fatal mistake. What she confessed to Bouchardon was that she was visited by Krumah and that he asked her to spy for Germany, and he offered her money.
I never intended to spy for the Germans, and I never did. I accepted the money because the Germans owed me for the valuable belongings which they seized from me.
So she said, okay, I did work for the Germans, okay, I did receive the H-21 matricle, but I never really worked for the Germans. On the contrary, I worked for Ladoux. Ladoux never answered and never came to testify in her favor. So she's trapped. She was judged and condemned by military justice. The military justice was extremely fast and expedient. The case itself was judged in 1 day and a half.
Of all my influential lovers, only 2 had the courage to come to my defense. Jules Cambon testified that I had never asked him about military or domestic affairs. Henri de Marguerite admonished prosecutor Mornay by saying, "You well know she is not a spy. Nothing has ever spoiled my good opinion of this lady." His kind words afforded me some small comfort. My lover Vadim did not testify. I was relieved, because I could not bear to see him under these circumstances.
The law says whoever has been in touch with the enemy, who's been passing intelligence to the enemy, is a spy and should be shot. She'd been in touch with the Germans. She'd passed information, even if it was absolutely worthless.
The prosecutor ended the trial with the statement that Mata-Hari was perhaps the greatest spy ever.
The reality is that she wasn't a very good spy.
She was a terrible spy.
It only took them 45 minutes to come up with a verdict. Guilty, which meant that she was going to have to face the firing squad. And she was taken back to prison to await her death. This is the part where she becomes the myth she is today. People very often are not equal to themselves in death. She was more than equal. Every day, every night, she was waiting for the footsteps of the people coming to fetch her, to take her to the place where she was going to be shot.
Death is nothing. Neither is life. Dying, sleeping, dreaming, passing away.
It's all part of one process of either being or not being, in whichever way one seeks to interpret it. So it's very striking indeed, I should say, and deeply touching, of course.
By all accounts, Mata-Hari faced her death with great bravery and grace.
Her life was a stage, and this was the last curtain call.
Her life was a stage, and this was the last curtain call.
Do not cry. Be cheerful like me. Imagine that I'm going on a long journey, that I will return and we will find each other again.
There was an element of still living in the fantasy and the illusion of Mata Hari. She didn't really come back down to Margaretha Zelle even in her final moments. Her execution was her final performance.
There were nearly 200 people witnessing the execution. It was like the cinema or the theater. She stood very erect.
She refused to be blindfolded. She blew a kiss to the priest, blew a kiss to her lawyer. The sergeant major even said, "By God, this lady really knows how to die."
She died the character that she created.
At that moment, she became the worldwide myth and star she is today. The next day, newspapers were commenting upon the execution. Many journalists had been so impressed that they wrote articles in praise of her, and the military censorship had to censor the newspapers. She was the 20th century woman who was killed by the last 19th century men.
Mata Hari has definitely reached mythological status.
She became a Hollywood and film icon because she has been depicted for 100 years now. Every author makes his own Mata Hari.
She was a powerful feminine figure who did things her own way.
She was already a free woman. She was already fighting for values which are values today, being equal to men, being free to organize her life.
And Mata Hari was an enigma. She has a projection for anybody. So whatever the culture wants to see in her, it's there. She's a Madonna, she's a whore, she's a spy, she's a stripper, she's a dancer, performance artist. She's got something for everybody.
Mata Hari's lasting legacy is the idea that you are not bound to the life that you are born into. You can choose your own biography. You can chase after your dream. You can become whatever you want. She is the ultimate self-made woman.
Death is nothing. Neither is life. All is illusion.